Now, let me go back to the top because eventually things in his marriage were deteriorating and my presence in that deterioration became harder to ignore. He had been at this point talking about the divorce, the pending divorce, and his wife knew something was wrong. She had concerns, she had suspicion, she had her own pain, and she was getting counsel from her overseer, her bishop and pastor, at the mother church while her marriage was in crisis. At this time, she was kind of removed from her seat as first lady at her church and reassigned to her pastor, her mother church, because she was getting counsel, being fed there, and you name it, right? She was no longer allowed to come to the local church. Which means, when you think about this, my existence and my relationship to her husband was already inside conversations happening at the top. If you're being counseled by your pastor and you have suspicions and so I'll say more about that later. And so later, she confronted me directly by phone in an angry, emotional interrogation about my relationship to her husband. I was shocked. I was stunned. I think her and her husband had been having arguments at this time, and one of the arguments escalated to the point where she may have discovered some evidence of him communicating with other folks, and she, I think, probably looked at some text messages or some emails exchanged between me and him and myself, and she asked him, and I think he had told me, he had messaged me saying that, she's fighting me today, she's fighting me hard today, and she asked him, I believe, well, what is your relationship to these individuals? What is your relationship to John? Ask, what is your relationship to me? And I think he, out of some type of rage or anger or exhaustion, dodging, honestly, the question, he deflected and said, you ask him, you go ask him. And she did. She called my phone and she asked me, what is your relationship to my husband? I was shocked. I was like, what? I was conflicted because this could be a moment for freedom for me, but it could also further put me in this prison that I feel like I'm in, that I've been in for all of these years. Because, could this be used against me in the sense that she's trying to free herself or leverage her own opportunity because of what she's been experiencing in the marriage? And maybe I would be an oversight, like, kind of forget what happens to you, like me first kind of thing. And so I also thought that this would be really good because I wanted her. So what I told her, I said, what do you mean? Why are you asking me this? I said, you need to ask your husband what his relationship to me is. I meant that. I wanted her to ask her husband what his relationship to me was. I wanted him to say to her that I've been pursuing this young man inappropriately for a long time. I've had eyes on him since he was 15 years old at the previous church that I used to preach and visit and prophesy at. I wanted him to say all of these things out of his mouth. Somehow he threw all the weight of explanation on me. I thought that was just really weird and inappropriate. This didn't help me. This didn't help me. And so I got off the phone with her. She was upset and she said, I need to talk to an adult. I'm going to talk to your aunt. And I'm like, you do what you have to do, but I'm still puzzled. Like, you need to ask your husband these questions. He is the adult. He needs to be responsible to answer these questions. He has been the pursuer. He needs to answer these questions. So I was confused. I felt thrown into the middle of a marital crisis that should have never been put onto me. And eventually I did agree to meet face-to-face with her and her top leader, her overseer. This was sometime after this experience with my aunt present. And that meeting confirmed to me that overseer knew. He knew exactly what was going on without question. He knew he heard enough. He had enough context. And in that meeting, he pretended to hear me out But when I corroborated her concerns about her husband, spoke truthfully about what I had experienced, he told me that I was unseasoned. Flat out told me that I was unseasoned in a very pastoral tone, kind of speaking down to me in that way. Those are the words that I remember. I'll never forget them. I won't ever forget being in this office and sitting in front of him. He told me that I was unseasoned. He made it clear that he wanted to speak to someone more seasoned, meaning not me. I didn't have the best articulation of my experience or my story at that time. At that time, I felt like I was failing in speech, speaking up for myself. And I felt, damn, like this man probably thinks I'm crazy. And I didn't feel, when you feel someone is empathetically in tune with you and they're hearing your story. I didn't get any of that. I got that. I'll tell you what I got. In that very moment where my truth should have mattered, in my age and my maturity, they were the disqualifying factors. They disqualified me. He then turned his attention to my aunt, stating specifically that I started speaking spiritually, using biblical language, adult language, authority language. And in that room, I watched the adults talk over me. Everybody spoke over me. I did not feel protected. I felt assessed. I felt measured. I felt managed. He wanted to know how much I knew, how much of a threat I was, how serious this thing was going to be in my involvement. I did not feel that he was trying to help me. I didn't feel like he was trying to protect me. I felt like he was trying to contain me. And yes, from my vantage point at that time, it felt like there was an alliance around protecting that marriage. He married them, protecting their ministry, protecting their association, the associate pastor's image, the mother church's image, the Brooklyn church's image, right? The entire apparatus. That's what it felt like for me. This was how I experienced it. I felt dismissed. I felt framed as confused, reduced to immaturity, my queerness, my spiritual state. I felt like a problem. I felt like a threat as somebody who just knew too much. And at the time, when I think about it now, this pastor was giving me more information than I needed. I knew everybody in the church's business, and it wasn't delivered to me everywhere, and it wasn't delivered to me every time in the best ways. It wasn't delivered in a spiritual way all of the time. I knew too much, I knew a lot of the associate pastors' personal business as well, because they were like best friends, all of them, in so many ways, and they would confide in him. And I knew things about them that I wouldn't even repeat to this day. I knew things about his wife, personal, intimate things that I wouldn't repeat to this day. But I could see that the threat that I saw that in the eyes of the overseer. My maturity, all of these things became easier to question than questioning the adult male pastor's conduct. And that's exactly how institutional power protects itself. That is how power protects power, right? And so when I say episode 2 is about the boundaries starting to move, I don't just mean one inappropriate moment or one person, right? I mean the whole architecture around it, the access, the preferential treatment, the prophetic flattery, the familial trust, right? The theological dependence that was developed, the physical closeness, right? The emotional exclusivity, the gift giving, the rides, the scriptural manipulation, the grooming of the community around me, the silence, the lack of protection, the top-down dismissal, all of it. That is how boundaries move, not all at once. Gradually, strategically, relationally, spiritually. And when it happens inside a powerful church culture, it can take years eventually for someone to fully understand what they were living inside of. And, in closing, the next part, I'm going to talk more about and more thoroughly through selective evidence, more directly, cards, letters, emails, language that shows how this relationship was being framed privately while it was being normalized publicly. Again, I'm not showing everything, but I am going to show enough. And once you see those documents in context, you'll understand why I kept them for 20 years.